So if you can't hear the audio, I apologize. But if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A section. Can you hear me, Amy?
I can, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I don't know what's going on. It's one of those days. Okay. All right. This is why I usually let Amy take over the the control.
Except I'm having bigger problems than just audio on my PowerPoint. So
yeah, there you go. All right. So I think we're done with whatever audio that I can hear that nobody else can hear. So
yeah.
Welcome. Just some of the things that it just talked about is if you have any questions, we love your questions. We just don't always have opportunities to answer them live. So please go ahead and put them in the Q&A as well as in the chat room. I have a quick little poll for you guys. If you are, can you take it for me? If I can get my controls to work. Whoops. You ever had one of those days? Today's one of those days.
Yeah, technical difficulties, right?
There we go. Okay, hopefully you guys can see this poll. So I've got a bunch of quotes here. And I want you guys to read every quote as quickly as you can. No rush really. And just choose the one that you're like, hey, that quote as a leader totally connects to me. So go ahead and take a look and I'll just keep on talking as you do. So today you are, if you're at the right webinar, this is the extended DISC webinar, what you need to know when facilitating leadership DISC sessions. So Amy and I are going to kind of share how we use the DISC leadership report as well as some other tips to help facilitate our leadership DISC sessions. Was there anything else, Amy, that I missed? Oh yeah, saying hello. My name is Christina and I'm the training director here at Extended DISC. Joining me today is my colleague, Amy Lipinski. She's the senior trainer here at Extended DISC. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Christina. The other thing just worth noting is that the webinar will be recorded. So if anybody misses any bit of it or wants to just listen to it again, the link will be sent to everybody participating or signed up. So that will be available after today's webinar as well.
Yes, but in addition to that, there is no, we are giving a half unit recertification unit for, I think it's SHRM or HRCI. It will not be given for the viewing the recording, and the recording itself will only be live on our YouTube channel for 2 weeks. All right, so let's go ahead and just end this poll so we can share the results. And let's see here, we have 40% of you chose leadership is not about giving energy, it's about unleashing other people's energy. Energy is right along the lines of extended DISC. It's all about energy. Somebody picked the ability to learn is the most important quality a leader can have. And I see somebody else picked leadership should be more about participative than directive, more enabling and then performing. So none of you picked who is going, the question isn't who is going to let me, it's who is going to stop me, and done is better than perfect. All right, so there's no right or wrong answers. There's no better or worse. It's just a fun poll, just we wanted to throw it out there. So let's go ahead and get started so we can share with you some of our tips about the extended DISC leadership assessment. But before we do, Amy, what should we talk about?
Well, one of the tips is just about thinking about your session before you get into your session, right? Setting yourself up for success. So one of those pieces of success is really just thinking about who your audience is. What's that end goal, that end objective? And thinking through your leadership audience, also getting that permission to share results, right? We don't want to just share people's results and not have them give us that permission. So making sure that we have permission to share results, because that can be a powerful piece. And we're going to share some of those team maps later in our session today that kind of is that impetus of why we want to, before the session, then get that permission. As always, Christina mentioned it just a minute ago, right? Extended DISC is all about energy. So focusing on behaviors, focusing on energy as we walk through and talk about the assessment. And as you know, right, we also love that interaction, like the poll we did. Sometimes they can tie in with the DISC assessment. Sometimes they can just be about leadership itself, right? But getting that activity and discussion, setting you up for interactions and setting that session up for interaction, right? So making sure that you have time and space if you're going to do breakout rooms, whether it be, again, in person or virtual, right? Even making sure that your virtual platform will support that if you're doing any sort of discussion or breakout rooms. And then, of course, practicing what you teach, right? Are you implementing DISC as you prepare for your session? Do you look at that team map and determine it's going to be a chatty group, it's going to be a quiet group, they're going to challenge me or ask a lot of questions, right? Are you practicing and adapting and modifying your style as you prepare for the session and also during the session in your own interactions and interactions with the class and the participants?
So one of the things that I guarantee you, Amy and I will do for every single one of our DISC workshops is to use the 4 steps to effective, we call it actually interactions template, but you can see here we've already adapted it for leadership. And what it does is I know and Amy knows that if we use and follow these 4 steps, get to the 4th step, at the end of the day, I know that I've provided my participants in my workshop the best possible foundation for understanding DISC, for understanding their own style, self-awareness, and then being able to understand other styles better, specifically in this leadership session, their employees, how to identify the main style of their employees. And then the most important step, which is the application piece. It really is about, as much as we can, using their real world experience and bringing it into the learning session, right? So the more that we can get them to tie in, oh, okay, my style, how do I show up? How do I show up to my employees? What style are my employees? What could I do differently? So the more, it's almost like we're having them create this action plan in the session itself. So what's great about it, as you'll learn, is that these 4 steps to effective leadership are built into the report. So let's talk about the report.
So what's great is, like Christina said, that workbook already has these 4 steps. So you can use that workbook to follow and guide yourself through the session. The workbook as well is a dynamic workbook. So it's not specific, it's not generic tips. They're specific to your DISC style and the extended DISC assessment, right? So that percentage, that relationship you have with the 4 quadrants. My favorite 2 words when debriefing the assessment is be curious. Be curious why how you responded would generate this statement. So be curious, to have them write that on the reports. Be curious, right? Enter into it with an open mind and be curious about the statements. Ask others for feedback, right? Reflect on them. I have looked at my own report and have started paying attention to behaviors that I'm not sure if that's me. And I start paying attention to my own behaviors throughout the week and reflect on it and have recognized that some of those behaviors I didn't think were me, lo and behold, I observed them in myself. So being curious and reflecting on the report. It's not meant to just be a one-time read during the session. It's meant to be a dynamic workbook that you bring out and look at and read through after various types of situations and interactions that you may have with other people.
Yeah, it's interesting, like 2 phrases come to mind when I do leadership workshops that I tend to, number one I ask, which is, what's the best style for a leader? And lo and behold, people's answers often surprise me. But the purpose of saying something like, that type of statement, what's the best style for a leader, is to get the discussion going. I mean, oftentimes it's not unusual to see the strengths of our own leadership style. But the point is to kind of build that self-awareness. How am I showing up? And that's the power of this report. The other statement that I like to talk about, we don't say it out loud, but a lot of us think it, especially when we come to leadership workshops, is, you know what? I'm a leader. I'm a manager. You know, my style works for me. I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be successful if I wasn't who I am, right? So it's not about changing who you are. We're not assuming you're broken and that you need to be fixed. It's just, again, the DISC report itself is to help us kind of create that keen sense of self-awareness. As we say, the most successful leaders own who they are, meaning they know when to use their strengths, but they also are comfortable with the challenges of their style. You know, some of you, you know, maybe you're use your charisma. You like to chat and interact with people, but maybe you also know that you sometimes talk too much and you lose track of tasks, but you own that. And the second part of it is the most successful leaders know when to adjust their style. So we're going to highlight, I forgot my little dynamic. Sorry, guys. These are my little animations I work so hard
on. As the dynamics come in, I just wanted to piggyback on something you said, Christina, because what I have found too is that a lot of times people come in and they have an idea of what they think the best style for that leader is. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's also breaking down that paradigm of thinking that there is a right or wrong style, right? And really getting people to be comfortable and embracing who they are, regardless of their style, and being proud of their style, right? So sometimes I love asking that question, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because I feel like it's a lot of times breaking down that paradigm of thinking that there is no right or wrong, right?
Exactly. So Amy and I wanted to kind of highlight just a couple sections of the report, and also at the same time remind you that you don't have to use the entire report in your DISC workshop, but I do highly recommend that you constantly bring it back into focus in your workshop. The reason is, again, is application. We want people to get used to using their report. You heard Amy say, reflect on it, go back and look at it again. If your responsibilities change or you get a new manager or new team members, go back and look at it. Your motivators might have changed, you know, how you develop your employees, how you help your employees achieve their goals. All these things may change for you. So it's a good way to go back, reset, and reflect. So as you heard me mention some kind of the contents that are in the leadership report, this one is about how you lead your employees. So the way that Amy and I like people to use this part of the report, we'll have them pull out their reports in the session and we'll say, okay, I want you to take a look at this section. I want you to look at some of these behaviors that tie to leading your employees based on your natural DISC style. And I want you to just, don't worry about the bar graphs yet, but I just want you to put little check marks or asterisks next to the ones where you just really feel like this is what I want to focus on now, or this is what I should focus on now. And then I want you to look at their corresponding bar graphs. And just know that this is not about ability. You can present any of these leadership behaviors at any point in time. It's a reflection of energy, you heard us say. Any bar graph that has a box, and that box represents your natural style, if it falls to the far right, which says natural to your style, it means that that's a leadership behavior, the way you lead your employees, that tends to be very comfortable for you. In fact, one thing we forget is actually the stronger or the bit more that strength is, that particular behavior is a strength to your style, the more that we tend to actually overuse it, to the point where it actually becomes a liability. So those 4s and 5s actually, absolutely rock it. Use those behaviors in how you lead, but be careful not to overuse them. And for any behaviors that have the box, or you're again representing your natural style in the spectrum, on the negative side, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you have to practice it more, or you just have to be more consciously aware of it. And it is a good question to ask yourself. If this is a leadership behavior that I tend to avoid or I don't think about. Do you need to challenge yourself? Do you need to develop it in you? So it's a great way to get your participants to interact with their report because they're taking notes, they're thinking about it, and there's different sections. And again, don't pick every section of the report. You'll be there for days. Just highlight a couple so that they know when they go home how to interpret other parts of the report.
So this is probably one of my favorite pages within the leadership report, right? Our tips to improving your success as a manager. Like all the list in the report, it's based on your profile too, so your natural style. And these are reminders and suggestions. It's not you have to do this, right? These are just reminders of what may help you to be more successful or things that we might want to stay away from, try to avoid. They might be those liabilities that Christina talked about, right? So sometimes this is just that reminder of ways to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone, maybe outside of what's our natural abilities, what we just do because it's comfort, right? We all like to stay, well, I shouldn't say we all, I know I love to stay in my comfort zone. So these types of pages help me remind myself how to push myself out of my comfort zone. The avoiding, like Christina mentioned, that might be ways that you're overusing your strength, right? How that might get you into trouble. And they're just great suggestions around how we can consciously remind ourselves to maybe move out of that comfort zone, push ourselves into a new or different behavior. And these different behaviors may help us be more successful than as a manager.
And one way that you can, again, use it as an interactive activity is to have your participants, your leaders, think, just write down some of their team members that maybe they find a little more challenging, or just people in general. It doesn't, again, doesn't matter because we're just practicing it, right? And then ask them to look at those reminders and suggestions of what to avoid, specifically thinking of that person. Are there certain suggestions that are listed here that I could try the next time I have an interaction with a specific person? Because, at the end of the day, what we say is you are in control of the interaction. As a manager, you also have that power piece in control of the interaction, right? So if it doesn't work, try something different. But the key here is to know when your style works in a situation and when you should make that adjustment. And the adjustments themselves, they're usually temporary, they're brief. And if it doesn't work, we say try something different. All right, so in terms of using your report, I would say the number one piece is to get them to take notes, to think of it as a workbook. Amy showed you an example of some of the tips and suggestions in a leadership report. There are additional ones, and I do it the same way. I ask people, there are ones that are specifically focused on how to interact with, let's say, a D style, based on your own natural style. And you can ask people, okay, just make a list of maybe a couple D styles or even one D style, and then take a look at those tip sections and ask yourself, are there any suggestions here that would help me better interact with this particular person? You heard Amy say, be curious. That's one of her favorite phrases, and it's become one of mine as well. As you have people read through their results, whether it's before, parts of it during, and again, reflecting after, that be curious part is, how do I lead? How do I believe that I lead? One of the things that Amy and I sometimes do is we use those polls a lot. It's kind of number one, if you're doing it virtually, and you can do it in person, classroom setting, it kind of establishes the fact that we want to hear from you. We want to interact with you. And one of the questions we sometimes will ask people is, identify what strengths you think you bring to your role as a leader. What are some challenges you think as a leader for you to develop further as a leader? What are some challenges for you to develop? Again, it's just to get them to start thinking about it. And then when they're able to compare it to their results, if there's any gaps there between where they identify themselves versus what they read in their report, we call those your blind spots. And these blind spots that some people have are often your greatest opportunity for development. Another poll question, or just kind of a throw it out there question, is how do you think your team views your leadership style? So the whole process is getting people to think about it. And now they have the data and the information that gives them the feedback on how they tend to show up to the rest of us, or specifically to their team. The personal action plan, not only is the report a report, it is a workbook. And at the very end of the report, there is what we call the personal action plan. And I highly recommend people use it, because sometimes, we have so much information, we just don't know where to start. And what it does is it's very kind of concise, simple action plan. It asks you, based on what you understand from your report results, what are some behaviors that you would start doing? What are some behaviors that you might consider not doing, stopping? And then, of course, pat yourself on the back. What are some behaviors that you think you're doing well and that you should continue doing? So it helps support the end goal that we want people to leave our session, not just learning something new, but actually starting to do those things that they learn. So in creating their leadership adjustment guide, it's really to get the leaders to think about themselves, but also their team as well. And one great activity that we use to do that, and I'm going to have Amy talk about it, is using their team map, the map of their team.
And what's great about this activity too is if they have actually their team has taken the assessment, you can plot it onto the diamond. They can also just think through and identify, practicing applying DISC to their team to think through where their team may fall. One thing I can guarantee you, and I'm not one to speak in absolutes typically, but I guarantee you, every leadership class I've ever facilitated, and I've done a lot of them, everybody wants to know, how can I get this for my team, right? Because they see the power in the tool and they realize, wow, what I could do with this information if I had it for my team. So like I said, this is a map that we can put the team members onto the diamond, right? They've taken the assessment. We can pull them in, run this map. And then, like, anytime we look at the diamond, looking at the halves of the model, right? This is really a starting point to conversation, opening a bridge to communication. And so we look at these halves of the model and we see, all right, is this team more active or are they reserved? Well, we can see most of those dots fall on the reserve side, right? And then are they more task-oriented or more people-oriented? Well, they might be a little bit of both. They look kind of half and half. Of course, I'm wanting to count those dots right now, but I can't multitask and do two things at once. So we'll just go with half and half, maybe a little more people-oriented. But the idea is that we know they're more reserved, right? So how does this impact then them accomplishing their goals, getting the results that they need to achieve as a team? Where are there maybe those similarities or gaps, right? How does that person who fits in our I style, how do they kind of show up and interact on the team? Are they feeling maybe kind of different, excluded maybe because they're the only active style? Being able to use this data as that conversation starter, right? Having conversations about how we interact with one another, how we communicate with one another, and how do we leverage our natural strengths and abilities to help us achieve the goals and results that we need to based on what has been laid out for us as a team for this year.
Yeah, and if you aren't at a point where maybe you had their team take the DISC result, start with a blank DISC diamond. Ask them to plot where they think, and it could just be the quadrants. What, do you think employee A is a D? Do you think employee B is an I style? And then, just so that they start thinking and recognizing that their employees prefer to communicate differently. So other resources that I wanted to share with you is, this is just an example, but the biggest takeaway here is don't reinvent the wheel. There's so many things that Amy and I and the other trainers here have developed relating to a leadership presentation. So this is one slide from a PowerPoint that we have. It's on how your employees prefer to listen. So I've made it nice. I'm very proud of myself. I don't think this has any animation, hopefully not. But I just wanted to remind you that we have infographics, we have PowerPoints, we have agendas and outlines. We have most everything, and we are more than happy to share with you.
Christina loves to talk about slides before we get to them. So yeah. She's already talked about many of these resources, but like she mentioned, right, you do not need to recreate the wheel. Reach out to us if you're looking for something specific. We have reports. We have the leadership report. We have a My Manager's Playbook, which really walks the leaders through how to apply DISC to their teams, right? So we have team reports, right? We have different reports that you can use. The other thing is our client resource site. If you are an active user of Extended DISC, you can reach out to us and be approved to have access to our client resource site. This gives you 24 hours, 7 days a week access to all kinds of resources. There is more than you can imagine available. So you don't have to do the same activities all the time, right? There's different and new activities that you can go check out. The facilitator guide. So the leadership report, there is an actual facilitator guide that walks you through with a PowerPoint how to facilitate to a group of leaders using that leadership assessment. And then like our webinar today, we do all kinds of different webinars and blogs. A lot of them are archived and you can see them on our YouTube channel, our different social media. Some of them are only up for a short time, but we're doing topics all the time. And this is our way of communicating with our clients about updates, new things that we're doing, just reminders about how to use DISC, especially when it comes to leadership training.
Yeah, and I just want to mention the client resource site. You do have to be an active subscriber of Extended DISC assessments. However, it doesn't mean that we can't share materials with you if you are still a client of Extended DISC. So it does require approval. I think you covered it. Basically, the biggest takeaway here is there are a lot of resources. You don't have to do it alone. And most importantly, use that leadership report to help you build your leadership workshop. It's got the 4 steps built into it. It has the key questions and action plans. And most of all, it has the feedback information that your clients need and want. And, you know, it also, to be honest with you, it helps you extend your relationship potentially with your participants. You're hoping to get them on board to get their employees assessed, which is what often happens in these workshops as well. So thank you guys all for joining us. I do have a webinar coming up. It's not until, it's a couple weeks from today. It's if you've been following along, we've been doing the 4 steps to effective interactions, which is, we focused on leadership today, but this is the general one. And so we do it once a month, and we're finishing up our round of 4. So Amy and Wilma are going to talk about why do I have to adjust my style, and that will be at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. You will get a full HRCI SHRM unit for live attendance to this. Again, this has been recorded. We will post it on our website for 2 weeks, but you will not get recertification units for viewing the recording. Thank you guys all.